Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so thrilled to have all of you here. My name is Lindsay Cuyava. I'm Senior Manager of Programming here with CGI, and would love to welcome all of you to Story Studio. We are going to have a great time. You're going to hear a lot of amazing stories, and I'm very honored to introduce you to your incredible host, MAIA ERVIN.
Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Hopefully everybody was able to stay warm and dry. I was not the 4 minutes that I was outside, but hopefully you all are doing okay. My name is MAIA ERVIN, and I am the Chief Impact Officer of a purpose-driven collective called Youth. And I'm super excited to be here today exploring a topic that is so close to my heart and the work that I do every day, which is amplifying the voices of marginalized communities that need it the most. So today we'll be hearing from some incredible change makers from across the globe who are actively addressing some of our most pressing issues, ranging from climate change all the way to the epidemic of gun violence. When looking for solutions to a lot of these issues, we often feel the need to act and respond quickly. So we're able to meet the moment, right? So we're able to identify the solutions to those pressing needs. But often when we think we've solved that problem, perhaps we've only tackled the most obvious problem, right? Perhaps we've only tackled the most visible challenge and haven't taken the time to actually evaluate the hidden history, systemic roots, causes, barriers that are actually perpetuating these issues. I was in 10th grade when I first realized the importance of storytelling. I was 16 years old when Trayvon Martin was murdered. That was only 1 year younger than he was at the time of his death. And I remember the story that was being told at the time, sort of this story about a black man, but not the story that I felt like should be told, about a black boy, right, and how his life was taken. And I remember how the story that was chosen to be amplified made me feel. I remember what it was like as a person whose mother always was quick to tell her she wasn't grown, what it was like to hear a 17-year-old boy be called a man. I remember the ramifications of that story. I remember the conversations I was having with my community and with my family, and what came out of that story, which was black boys and men shouldn't be walking around with hoodies. But imagine if we told the real story, right? About a black boy who was hunted by a civilian for simply existing. Imagine if we told that story and how that story would have gotten to the root of the actual issue, right? But when we're quick to act, when we're quick to have those conversations and not really willing to take that deeper look, we're missing that. We're missing the root cause. So that's why I'm super excited to have some of the folks here in our session, because they're doing exactly that, having those intense conversations to get to the root cause. So our first group of storytellers come from different backgrounds and sectors, but are working to increase access to resources and tools that will ultimately help everybody, not just the usual suspects, achieve an equitable, thriving, and just future. So join me in welcoming Ruth Miller, Sage Lanier, and KEELY Catwells.
Ya ya na way ha way hey oh ya ya na way ha way hey oh ya na way ha way hey oh ya ya na way hey oh. I am Shivak Isin. I am the embodiment of my ancestors and my descendants. I walk the trails of my homelands, Dene and Eshnena. I swim in my glacial lakes and am cleansed. I consider our shika, the salmon, my family, my kin, my blood. And every summer, we wonder how many salmon will swim home to us. Each winter, the snowpack falls differently, and our lake becomes more and more treacherous to cross. Every year, my home of Alaska and the Arctic warm at 4 times the rate as the rest of the world. We know our climate crisis began with colonization, and we know that it will continue until we reestablish relationships of reciprocity, indigenous stewardship of land, and find deep healing. Climate justice work and indigenous rights were my inheritance and became my life career, although I admit I'm young. This work enveloped all of my time, all of my focus, all of my education. I worked in climate policy, climate education, protest work. But no climate advocacy can happen fast enough when our fish are dying in our streams of unprecedented heat waves, or when typhoons are battering our western villages, leaving devastation in their wake and disrupting our food systems, or when communities up and down the interior cannot fish for the 4th year in a row and therefore cannot pass on their culture. So as organizers, we work harder, we stay up later, we give all that we can give, knowing that the difference we make might be small, we might never see it come to fruition. But over my decade of work, the battleground became my own body. And in truth, I had suffered with chronic pain for many years, fighting desperately to hide it while I was collapsing on Zoom calls and hiding in pain in the back of conference rooms. I was angry and resentful and ashamed that I would be slowed down, that I would be limited. And as this metastasized, I was brought to my own personal abyss. I thought I was supposed to be a martyr. I thought I was supposed to sacrifice myself for the lands that I love. But I realize now that my body was teaching me through the only language that I was willing to listen to, pain. Colonialism distances us from our ability to witness pleasure, to feel pleasure. And I realized that work towards justice that comes at the expense of an indigenous woman's health is not truly liberatory work. My body is my first territory to defend, and my joy is my birthright, and I will concede neither to colonization. So I had to learn how to heal. I realized we must not only stop the bad that so many of us work tirelessly towards, but in order to create a new world that is irresistible, that is compelling, that invites us to embrace it, that is fundamentally good, we must first recognize pleasure within ourselves. We must know what it feels like. Well, indigenous peoples remember systems based on wellness. We remember this interconnectedness that humanizes us and validates our joy. And as we say in Alaska, we remember forward. In my language, Nuralnik, it is remembered within us. The work that I choose now is to preserve this good past a time of crisis. The Smokehouse Collective is an Alaska Indigenous food network focused on harvesting and processing and sharing salmon from resource-abundant regions of Alaska to communities and villages impacted by the climate crisis. It is culturally rooted mutual aid that preserves indigenous relationships to salmon as a climate solution by revitalizing our traditional kinship networks of trade to build food security across the Arctic. But what is truly revelatory of this work and what brings me deep joy is the opportunity for healing. When families can come to the water again, put their nets in, when they can teach their kids how to fillet a fish, when they can speak their languages. It is the smell of alder smoldering as it cures our fish. It is the sound of aunties telling stories long into the night under the midnight sun and laughing those big belly laughs. It is revelatory because it opens up a pathway to be human once more. And it creates a framework for what we want to build. That is what we must preserve, above all, through climate crisis. We must preserve the joy that feeds our light and fuels our fight. And for me, today is my personal proof of concept. After a long healing journey, today is my very first day in a musical theater program at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts here in Manhattan. Because my voice is my medicine. and my medicine is my voice. And investing in myself, healing myself, will allow me to go home to Dene and Eshnena, reinvented, reimagined, and re-inspired. I will be lighter than when I left. And this will serve my community, this will serve my land, this will serve my climate. Now I have space to dream and imagine and wonder, how will the story of the climate crisis change once we invest in our storytellers? What new songs will we compose about these dark and transformative times? How can we use dramatic practices to metabolize grief and trauma so that we do not store it in our bodies and pass it on? I will sing new songs of the climate crisis, and I will sing new songs of what will come after. Some of those songs will be mourning songs to witness what will die, what must die. Some of those songs will be songs of war, but still I will sing. I will sing of creation and beauty and joy. My joy will be, I hope, an invitation to others to grow joy of their own. So gather your medicines, invest in your own healing, find your joy for justice, because we do not need martyrs. We need sustainable movements that will last to build a world of beauty past crisis. We need you to last. We need us together. So let this be the end of one verse and the beginning of the rest of our chorus. I cannot wait to hear this song. Shanann.
Hi everyone, my name is Sage Lanier. Very excited to be here with you today. My story starts in a very interesting way. I was left behind by the education system. I was a bright young girl, good grades, but because of financial reasons, I had to leave school at 16 for a fast food job. When I think about my teenage years, I remember rage. I had been very passionate about feminism and racial justice since I was a preteen, and so it was glaringly obvious to me how the system was set up for me to fail as a young girl of color from a low-income community. When I, by very lucky circumstances, got back to high school the next year, I started learning about the environment. I learned that Western agricultural practices are causing us to run out of farmable soil, and that was going to predominantly affect women and people of color. I learned that by 2050, it's expected that we'll have at least 1 billion climate refugees, the majority of which would be women and people of color. So I realized that all of these things, the environment, racial justice, gender equality, were connected. I was looking around at all these issues as a very young woman, asking myself, what would be the most important thing I could do? And I realized I actually just can't do this alone. I need more allies. And then I looked outside of my bubble and I realized how little the average person knew about the social and ecological systems that keep us all alive, how little I knew. If you were to ask the average person what the leading cause of climate change is, they might tell you plastic pollution or gas-powered cars, because that's what the media focuses on. But plastic and cars, respectively, are responsible for 4 and 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We are not being given the full story, and we can't solve problems we're not even aware of. So when I was accepted to Berkeley the next year, I set out for myself to find out the truth about everything, find out the scope and scale of the ecological crisis, all of its different facets and faces, but also looking for solutions. I, like every person my age, just desperately wanted to know that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Even at Berkeley, with one of the best environmental programs in the world, we were being told that there wasn't really a point in planning for a future because we wouldn't have one. And that is what the science says if we continue on the trajectory we're on. But the focus has always been on understanding the problem rather than a realistic path for what we can do about it. Being told that there wasn't a point in planning for my future did not make me feel defeated, it made me defiant, determined that there must be another way. So as I researched, I started designing a curriculum, and I incorporated decarbonization and the circular economy and regenerative food systems and so much more, things I wasn't hearing about in the media. And I wrote it as a sort of crash course, everything you need to know about the planet. It's solutions-focused, it's action-oriented, it's a vision for what a better world could look like. I named it Solutions for a Sustainable and Just Future. When I was 19, I started teaching my first class at Berkeley of 25 people. Within 4 semesters, I broke the record for the largest student-led class with 160. The next semester, I doubled it with 300. And I started reading the most crazy things in our student feedback. People were saying, this program was life-changing for me. I am simply not the person I was when I started this course. People who were studying bioengineering were saying now they wanted to go in a green chemistry focus. People who were in the business school were interested in starting enterprises that fit in with a circular economy. People were telling me they decided to change their major and career into environmentalism. All of these people are now moving out into the world with a vision for what a more sustainable and just future could look like, and there's nothing I can do to stop them even if I wanted to. And that has turned out to be the most important thing I could do. We attracted attention from the World Economic Forum and the New York Times, and all of a sudden people all over the world were paying attention to this program, and hundreds reached out wanting a similar program at their institution, because if the majority of educational institutions today still don't have a base level of environmental education. Earlier this year, we launched as a formal nonprofit, Sustainable and Just Future. Someone from the Clinton Global team heard me give a radio interview and reached out, and now we are a 2023 commitment maker. My vision is to equip the next generation with the knowledge and tools we need to carve a livable future out of a climate-changed world. I know utopia is impossible, but in my wildest dreams, we've just managed to keep every mouth fed in the face of an ever-destabilizing global ecosystem. I do this work for those younger than me. I do it for future generations, for vulnerable and disadvantaged people globally. And I do it for 16-year-old Sage.
I never excelled in school. Actually, quite the opposite. I was terrible. I failed every class. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at a young age, but that wasn't all the reasons for my terrible performance. I was bullied very badly. So my amazing mum was determined to find a space where I felt like I could fit in. She put me in dance class, and that became my second home. At 16, I danced my way into a prestigious dance academy in London. Every thought was filled with pirouettes and grand jetés, until one day, I woke up in excruciating pain. That pain got worse and worse, so naturally, I went to the doctors. The doctors were very quick to tell me that my pain and my deteriorating health was down to stress and an eating disorder. Before long, I couldn't physically eat. I became so unwell and lost so much weight that I became unrecognizable. And then for the next 4 years, I was hospitalized. To this day, I live with chronic illness, chronic pain, and a permanent ileostomy, as well as PTSD from the medical trauma that I went through. I did get the relevant tests in the end, and many surgeries that both saved and changed my life. When I was finally well enough to leave hospital, I took a trip to Los Angeles with the goal of having a fresh start. I ended up getting a job within the entertainment industry. I was so happy. And after disclosing my medical condition and asking for reasonable accommodations, I got told that I could no longer have that job. That was a big wake-up call for me, and the realization that I am disabled, that the world that I live in is no longer built with me in mind. For instance, when I need a seat on the bus, I am consistently told that I don't look disabled. For the same reason, when I use the disabled bathroom, I am often accused of taking advantage of the system. Attitudinal, physical, communication barriers are glaringly prevalent to me and the disabled community that I am now a part of. When we discuss disability rights, our minds often leap to the visual cues, ramps, accessible restrooms, and whilst these are important, they are just the tip of the iceberg. Because of these experiences, I started helping some of my disabled friends get jobs in Hollywood, helping them get acting roles, writing, directing. And very quickly, this became a fully fledged talent agency. I called it See Talent because disabled people rarely get access to option A or option B, and we have to create our own option C. See Talent has placed hundreds of artists in thousands of roles, including recently HBO's The Last of Us, the Hunger Games prequel, and with many brands, including Rihanna's Savage X Fenty, with Amazon, Disney, Google, and countless others. See Talent's roster has talent that has a following of over 50 million people. And in 2022, See Talent was acquired by a creator company, marking one of the largest known investments ever made within disability within the creative industries. And this not only signifies a demand for disability representation, but also the incredible power and untapped economic opportunity that the disabled community holds. But despite the strides that we have made with disability representation, disabled people are still legally allowed to be paid sub-minimum wage across 36 states in America. Out of the 193 United Nations member states, only 45 of those have anti-disability discrimination policies. Disabled people are twice more likely to live in poverty than non-disabled people, and twice more likely to be unemployed than non-disabled people. And this is far, far worse for those from low-income communities and those with intersectional identities. Since the acquisition, I founded Making Space, a talent acquisition and learning experience platform for companies to access pre-qualified underrepresented talent pools. Because when I was building See Talent, it became very clear that whenever we do anything that is disability, diversity, or impact-centric, then as soon as budgets get cut and times get hard, we are the first thing to be deprioritized. So I wanted to create a solution that helps companies save money on their biggest yearly losses, but also ensures that disabled, low-income, and underrepresented talent get access to long-term, meaningful employment and can get into leadership positions. Disability has consistently been seen as tragedy, as opposed to the natural part of the human experience, because we all, at some stage in our lives, will become disabled, whether that be permanently or temporarily. Film, TV, and media plays an incredible part in the stereotypes and stigmas that exist today. So under the Making Space umbrella, we have created Making Space Media. And we've partnered with Reese Witherspoon's company, Hello Sunshine, to ensure that the disabled narratives get told, the untold stories, because I truly believe we can change the world if we learn to tell and listen to a new set of stories about the world that we want to create in accessible spaces and with authentic voices. So, whilst ramps and accessible restrooms are imperative, we must dismantle the intangible walls of prejudice and bias. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, we're back. Hopefully you all enjoyed the storytellers that were just on stage. A round of applause again. Yes, thank you. A round of applause again for these amazing folks. I'm gonna take my phone out because, not because I'm a Gen Zer that can't live without it, but because I was taking some notes on some of the things that these folks were saying. Ruth, there was something that you said in your story that I want to start off with. I would love for you to elaborate on, and then I want to ask the other folks how this comment relates to them. You said, my medicine is my voice. I literally got chills when you said that. Can you elaborate a bit more on what that means to you?
Yeah, I can, I'll elaborate from a cultural perspective and from a political perspective, if that's okay. From a cultural perspective, in our Dena cosmology, the gifts, the talents, the interests, the skills that we have are gifts from Nakatani, from Creator. They are the embodiments of our ancestors, particularly those whose names we carry. For me, I carry the name of both my grandmothers. Both of them were named Ruth. And those gifts flow through us, but not without responsibility, with a calling to use those gifts for the benefit of our community, right? So in an anti-capitalist indigenous society, in a matriarchal society, folks wouldn't necessarily be told, do this because you were born male, or do this because you were born female. We would be benefited on the whole by allowing each of our individuals to serve the community through their own joys, their own gifts, and the exercise of their skills. And to me, doing decolonization work means thinking critically about the ways that we spend our time and energy. Will we be complicit in extracting our energy from ourselves for the benefit of institutions that don't care about how much we've slept or how we're feeling or if we have a migraine? What is the way that we will be in colonial systems so that we can begin to dismantle them from the inside? So this is where the political aspect comes in. I recognize that I carry not just the voice of my grandmothers with me, one of whom was a Dena woman who grew up in the village of Ikuk and loved to sing jazz. And the other was a Jewish woman who lived for 60 years, a couple blocks downtown from us, and whose life work was with the United Nations. And so this voice that I've been given must then be implemented and politicized. This must be paired with recognition of the privileges I've also been given, of higher education, of being a first language English speaker. So that when we take kind of the fertile soil that is our inheritance, we grow things that are not just, upholding these structures of colonization, but that are infused with creativity, infused with collective power, and infused with vision for something that will grow beyond just us as an individual.
Thank you. Yeah, literally. Thank you for expounding on that. Sage and KEELY, I would love to hear your reactions or response to that comment in terms of, is that something that you also relate to, your voice sort of being your medicine, and that how that has impacted your storytelling and your journey? Let's start with Sage.
I think yes. Wait one moment to gather my thoughts. I realized that sort of I think we spend a little too much time talking about climate doom for sure. It's not as important as talking about the solutions. But I do feel that it never really quite infected me in the way that I saw the other really passionate people around me wilting, because I had a very unique program. I had a very unique way of going about my week where I was just so focused on, okay, that's the food system, so many problems, but what are the next steps? What could we do? And then I'm talking with people and I'm connecting people and I'm bringing them, have you heard of this organization? Okay, you should get involved. I have their phone number. Let's get you plugged in. And I think that action and being able to be so visible in front of hundreds of my peers on a routine basis where, I had the microphone really was an antidote to that sense of doom or helplessness.
Yeah, I think for me, oftentimes when we think of disability, we don't associate it with pride. But I remember when I started to find disabled leaders and people who have been doing this advocacy for so long, the pride that they would have within the community. And that was so important for me to realize, and also to recognize that we can be proud of being disabled, but also have a complicated relationship with our medical conditions. But I really believe that it's that the voices of others, for me, was truly medicine, of realizing that my life doesn't have to have ended at the age of 17, 18, because I have new circumstances. It's truly just the beginning, and there has been so much pride within our communities, whether that's been because of the ADA being signed, although we've still got so much work to do. But there's so many wins, so much progress, and I think it can be easy to, unfortunately, just focus on the issues because there are so many. But listening to the people who've been doing this work and using their voices as medicine has been really impactful to me.
Yeah. Round of applause, yeah, for sure. I wanna segue off of something that you said, KEELY, but I was actually gonna bring up anyway, so I'm happy that we, all three of you have actually touched on this point. Sort of this idea of having pride in your work. And I feel like this relates to what you said, Ruth, in your monologue of finding joy in the justice. And I feel like that also relates to this moment that we had, Sage, if you're okay with me talking about it, backstage just now, after Sage got off, was very emotional about her monologue, and it was joy. How do you find, and this is a question for all three of you, let's start with KEELY first, how do you find joy in the justice? Because these are some serious issues that we're talking about, and I can even find, I myself struggle with that a lot. So how do you find the joy in the justice?
I think it's absolutely looking at the wins. For me, when I started C Talent, when we placed the first talent within a role that didn't necessarily specify that that character had to be disabled, they were just a politician, and the person that we placed in that role had a disability, and they were playing this politician. That was such a huge win, and I found so much pride in that. And I think, again, I go back to community, surrounding yourselves with people who are actively doing this work, finding those wins. And I really believe that within what we do with disability, it's so important to normalize disabled people being experts in subjects beyond disability. So I take so much pride when I see my friends, my colleagues, my peers doing incredible things that honestly have nothing to do with disability rights.
Yeah. Sage?
I think it, again, all comes down to the wins. I've learned to cry pretty often, and I think it's a beautiful thing. Someone wrote to me someone sent me a DM on Instagram saying that because of this program he had started he had actually convinced the city to give up 2 plots of land in their majority black and brown neighborhood and started community gardens. They didn't have a grocery store, and I'm sobbing. There's just so much joy to be found in the realization that people would be activated if they had the tools and resources. And that's kind of like my superpower, is that everyone I touch becomes an activist. And so I'm just like, always like, I just need to unlock it in each of you. And then we're all gonna be on the same page and we're gonna be fine from there on out. So I think the joy is in this constant puzzle of like, not even puzzle, but it's like stepping stones where I'm like, okay, you're an actress now? Okay, you're passionate now? Okay. And then you, and now we're all, and coalition, yeah, so it's beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Ruth?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel so much resonance with what each of you two are sharing, both from a disability perspective, in my own personal journey with my health, but also from a collective organizing perspective, and the way that our organizing can and should change to incorporate joyful moments, to incorporate these wins and that recognition and acknowledgement. For me, I spent so much, I began working in climate advocacy at the age of 15, and I did not stop. And I kind of laugh and snicker at the idea of burnout, because I think I was just burnt out for most of my adolescence. I was definitely very depressed and stressed. And I didn't, I guess let me begin with this teaching. A very important mentor of mine told me that our spirit is one with all of creation. It is one with Nakatani. We are all intertwined in the spirit world. Our bodies are our vessel that allow us to interpret spirit into this plane. Our minds occasionally catch up. So for me, my transformation didn't come from a realization. My transformation came from being bedridden and being hospitalized and being absolutely destroyed by a terrible disease. It took me time to turn the grief that I had around that as a young person into humility and gratitude. When I became grateful for the lesson that I learned when I was so deprived of joy, I began to understand how crucial it is for us to incorporate joy into our work. And luckily, it was around that time that everyone else around me was also struggling. Around 2020, I don't know what was happening then, but it's odd. We began to shift our workplace as well. So instead of moving at what we called a pace of colonization, we began moving at a pace of creation, which incorporated a 4-day work week, which incorporated paid leave for hunting and fishing and gathering activities, which gave much more spacious room for us to take walks during the day, to go get a massage or go to acupuncture. When we began to withdraw our consent from colonial conceptions of work and reorient our labor, our community organizing, to be doing it in a way where we could feel good, our work became much more potent, our work became much more effective, and we were happier.
Yeah. Thank y'all so much. We are at time for this panel, but there's one thing that I quickly want to ask because it does piggyback off of something Sage said, and I think it's super important for the topic of this panel, which is getting beyond the tip of the iceberg. All of you tell your stories, which is centered around amplifying young folks and giving them the access and the resources to make these changes. What is one of the most common things that you see people do to support your cause that actually does not support your cause? And what would you like them to do instead, very quickly? Let's start with Ruth.
Oh my gosh, can we start with someone else?
Oh yeah, let's start with KEELY.
I would say, I think non-disabled people tend to spread messages of inspiration porn. Inspiration porn is a term that was coined by the late Stella Young, disability activist, and it means that people tend to objectify disabled people for being inspirational solely based on their disability. This is extremely problematic. So I would say stop sending messages of inspiration porn. And also, attitudes is one of the biggest things that we face within our community. Even if the world was incredibly accessible, the most accessible world that we could live in, if we still have attitudes that think that disability or is tragedy or charity, or they try and put their assumptions on us of what we can or cannot do, then we will remain disabled. So I would say change those biases, speak to disabled people, and don't spread those messages of inspiration porn.
Very quickly, I'm going to say shopping. People think that there's something that you can buy that's going to benefit the planet that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, the only thing you can do that's actually good for the planet is restoration. So get your hands dirty.
Get your hands dirty. Yeah. Yeah, so often we have folks come to Alaska who either have a lot of money or have a lot of power and think that that means that they know better than us. So to me, I would say the best thing that we could do is defer to indigenous sovereignty, defer to indigenous leaders who have grown with our land over 30,000 plus years. It is our communities, it is our languages, it's our lifeways, our cosmovisions that are reflections of what real ecological balance looks like. It is the lands that gave us our languages, that taught us how to love them well. And so what is so damaging is when folks come into our communities and attempt to lead, when instead they should be uplifting indigenous leadership and getting their hands dirty. For sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Round of applause for our panelists. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Amazing. At CGI, you'll often hear about how people who would normally never cross paths actually have a chance of meeting, which can often lead to incredible new initiatives and partnerships. So our next segment will bring two such individuals to the stage. So please join me in welcoming Piyush Tiwari and Nicole Hockley.
Morning. Each year, 1.35 million people leave their homes to access their very basic rights to healthcare, to education, to livelihood, but never come back home. They are snatched away abruptly and brutally in road crashes. Over 90% of these people live in low and middle income countries like India, which alone sees about 150,000 deaths each year. That's about 420 deaths every day, the capacity of a Boeing 747-400 aircraft. This reality came rushing home to me on 5th April 2007 when I lost Shivam. You see, Shivam was more than just a little cousin for me. When I was only 12 years old, I saw my family go through a deep financial crisis. We lost everything. But seeing my parents rebuild their lives gave me a lot of hope and courage, and I was able to overcome my fear of failure. I eventually did well in college and was able to get a job that could help my family. Shivam's family was going through a similar crisis, and in this feisty, full of life teenager, I saw myself with love for family and his country. To him, I had become a mentor, and to me, he was like a son. Shivam did not just die because he was hit by a car whose driver panicked, tried to flee the scene, and ran over him once again. He died because while he was lying on the road, writhing in pain, asking passers-by for help, dozens of bystanders stood by but did nothing to save his life. What I thought was an isolated case was in fact the tip of the iceberg. Nearly 50% of those who died in road crashes in India back then, that's 75,000 people, died despite having treatable injuries, and their lives could have been saved if they had just received help from a bystander. What drove public inaction was not just apathy. It was a very profound fear of the law, of getting harassed and intimidated by the police, by hospital staff, and having to go through court procedures, in some cases for decades. India desperately needed a Good Samaritan law. And that became the mission of my life back in 2008. What I thought would be a nonpartisan issue received tremendous amount of resistance. I was ridiculed, gaslighted, and even threatened not to challenge police powers to detain and question Good Samaritans. With only assurances from policymakers and resistance from operators, I had no option but to persist. And that took me to take the government of India to our Supreme Court. I argued that the preservation of life was paramount. I shared the feeling of loss and helplessness that thousands of families go through each year, knowing that their loved ones would have made it only if a bystander had stepped forward to save their life. We all know what that feeling is like. The government, on the other hand, fielded its best lawyers to argue against us, but I was able to convince them that this was the need of the hour. I still remember standing in the Supreme Court of India on 30th of March 2016. The government of India had just withdrawn its opposition to our demand, and the Supreme Court of India instituted that day a nationwide binding Good Samaritan law that would protect and insulate all those who came forward to help the injured. Today, Save Life Foundation is working to transform the deadliest highways in India into zero fatality corridors. We are institutionalizing what works so that we become redundant and scaling the initiative beyond India to other low and middle income countries in need desperately of an intervention like this. In this journey of 15 years, I've learned quite a few things, but the one thing I want to leave with you today is that whether it's climate change or road safety, when you take on an issue, please know that you're not alone. For every donor who said no to me, I found 5 who said yes. For every government official who doubted us, who showed me the door, I found a dozen who embraced us. So my advice to you is that if you are passionate about a problem, pick it up and know that you will find a tribe of change makers to support you, like many present in this room today. Thank you.
Hello. People have different reactions when they first meet me. Some start crying. Some look away, unable to find any words. Most want to hug me, and some will tell me about where they were when they first heard the awful news. I understand, and it's all okay. I am the embodiment of a parent's worst nightmare. You see, I stand before you not only as an advocate for change, but as a Sandy Hook mom, a mother who knows firsthand the devastating impacts of gun violence. Both of my sons were at Sandy Hook Elementary School on December 14th, 2012. Jake was in 3rd grade and Dylan was in 1st grade when a disturbed young man shot his way through the locked front door and used his AR-15 with high-capacity magazines to fire 154 rounds in less than 5 minutes. In those few minutes, he killed 6 educators and 20 innocent 6- and 7-year-olds. Jake survived, and for that I am so grateful. But Dylan, my beautiful baby boy, was shot 5 times and died instantly. And for me, our family, and my town, life completely changed. That's why I helped launch Sandy Hook Promise just 1 month after the shooting. I had to find answers to the question that still burns in my heart every day. What could have prevented this? Our mission is simple. We prevent tragedies and loss of life by providing programs that teach people how to recognize warning signs of potential violence and then to intervene before that violence can occur. And we advocate for state and federal legislation in the areas of mental health and wellness, school safety, and gun violence prevention. Sounds like something everyone could get behind, right? So when the Manchin-Toomey background checks bill failed in April 2013, just 4 months after the shooting, I felt like I'd failed my sons all over again. I'd failed to protect Dylan from dying, and I'd failed to protect Jake's future safety. And I felt like I'd failed to understand people. Now, every other national gun violence prevention organization at that time was only focused on the tip of the iceberg. We were only focused on legislative change, because it seemed like the obvious solution. So why did it fail? Because our country wasn't ready. We weren't addressing the underlying polarized feelings around gun violence, nor the anger and fear that had been fueling it for decades. So I decided to try something different. I started by studying the root causes of gun violence, and I studied previous social movements, everything from marriage equality back to civil rights, to understand what levers they had pulled to create long-term behavioral change and to enact laws that support and enforce it. And we became totally different as an organization. We learned to build bridges between differing points of view, to listen more than we speak, and to treat all perspectives with respect and curiosity, even those we vehemently disagree with. And I learned to center voice of youth at the core of our work and put everything around their needs, education, and advocacy. So we became very different. And even though we proved that our intentionally nonpartisan strategy worked, and we were successfully scaling our programs with tremendous impact, including stopping over 500 youth suicides and 15 credible school shooting plots, we still faced challenges. Bridge building can be hard work. Sometimes we were challenged by the school district we worked with. I remember one time, one said, "We love your content, but we just need you to remove some stuff. The LGBTQ stuff, all of it." Like where we reference that LGBTQ youth are at increased risk of suicide and self-harm and suffering from mental health issues like anxiety and depression. Honestly, I was stunned, and this went against all of our organizational values. We may be politically nonpartisan, but we are fully kid partisan. Rather than simply saying no, I asked questions to understand, where is this coming from? How can we help you bridge that gap? Because to exclude any community would be to do harm. Gun violence and youth violence is intersectional and disproportionately affects marginalized and vulnerable populations such as students of color and LGBTQ youth. Fortunately, we were able to help them navigate to a successful outcome where no content was changed, students received the exact same stuff we did everywhere else, and their stakeholders' concerns were managed. But one of the biggest challenges we continue to face is apathy and hopelessness. Too many people are starting to give up on gun violence prevention. They say if nothing changed since Sandy Hook, that nothing ever will. I have never once given up my hope. I know this is hard, but I know it is possible. And I know that we can make this difference. Now, some might call that strength, some might call that resilience. I call it purpose. And I think it's best summed up in the opening line of the promise that I first read when I launched my organization 10 years ago. It says, "Our hearts are broken, our spirit is not." I still believe in the power of the promise, and I still believe in people. Over the last 10 years, I have met so many people from all walks of life, backgrounds, cultures, beliefs, from presidents to philanthropists, celebrities and influencers to everyday people. We do have our differences, but we have more in common than we think. And with this issue, nobody is pro-gun violence. We are all just people, just parents who want to keep our kids safe in their homes, schools, and communities. That is my commitment and my eternal promise. Please keep that promise with me. Thank you.
Another round of applause for these storytellers. You both did amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. One thing that rings true as sort of a connection between both of your stories is this idea of having to really battle barriers for something that should really be a no-brainer. When we talk about the #1 cause of death in the United States for children, and we are not having enough conversations around how we limit that, but we're having other conversations, to your point, about the queer community, et cetera, right? So to that point, when you began your work, what was the most unsuspecting thing you discovered that ended up being a barrier for you? Let's start with you, producer.
Sure. So in my case, I think, and we're still battling some of that even today, it's oftentimes a battle of the mindset. In case of road crashes, for a lot of policymakers, for a lot of even the public, it was not considered to be an important enough issue or a development issue in the first place. They were called car crashes. So it's an issue of the car owner and not really of the poor. That might be true for the West, but that's absolutely untrue for India. 64% of people who are killed in road crashes in India come from extremely poor backgrounds. They are pedestrians, they are cyclists, they are two-wheeler riders, not by choice, but by compulsion. So a lot of times, the battle is to change that mindset, that this issue is having a profound impact on societies like India, which are trying to emerge out of poverty. And just as people attempt to do that, they are pulled back into poverty because their breadwinners are killed or maimed in these crashes. So fighting mindsets has been and is an ongoing challenge in this work that we do.
Yeah, yeah. Nicole.
I would absolutely echo that it is a mindset challenge. And people feel that you either need to be pro-gun or anti-gun, and that there's no room in between. We have a gun problem as a country. I totally recognize that. We have more guns than people. We're not going to get rid of all the guns, so let's deal with that as part of the problem on the table and figure out how do you bridge together, because like I said, no one is pro-gun violence. A gun-owning parent wants their child to come home from school just like every other parent. So getting past the mindset of as soon as someone hears the word gun, thinking, oh, you know, I have to be on this side or the other side. This is an and situation. This is about how we work together. And sometimes that is the biggest barrier. And that's why we don't ever do any naming or shaming, or it's all about seeking to understand, building bridges, and trying to break down perhaps some ideological bonds that people think they might have. But when you really get down to it, everyone wants to keep their family and their kids safe. So coming from that place and trying to get to that mindset frame is where we focus a lot of our work.
Yeah, yeah. Another barrier that I heard you both speak to was politically or policy-wise. There being barriers to really getting the change implemented, the infrastructure implemented to drive that change that we're asking for. And for a lot of us, that is almost the pinnacle, right? Like that's the goal, is to get that infrastructure embedded into our system. So when you received that sort of pushback or that barrier, how did you sort of work through that and continue to push through that and not be like, hey, this is the final stop for me, but instead be like, there are other ways around it, right? What was sort of going through your head on your journey about on pushing through beyond policy, beyond politics to make this change?
Yeah, you know, I'm an eternal optimist, or I wouldn't survive in this space that I'm working in. So for me, it's all about finding champions. I spoke about building a tribe, and I think we've found in the course of our journey a number of champions. Now, oftentimes it's a bit of a technical work as well to identify who those champions are, because not everybody. I think everybody is empathetic towards loss and losing families and so on and so forth. But I think people, especially policymakers, also have their jobs to do. So what we started to do is, you know, simplistically speaking, I carried out a market segmentation of the Parliament of India, where I found champion buyers. These were members of Parliament who had experienced the issue firsthand. I found economic buyers who were concerned about the GDP loss because of road crashes in India. I was able to find technical buyers whose job it was in the first place to address this issue. And I found competitive buyers, people who were concerned about India's reputation as far as this issue was concerned. So I think it's a combination of, you know, a bit of a, you know, technical approach, but also, you know, persistence in ensuring that you convert, you know, people who are reluctant or people who are on the edge into your allies. And that's the process that we've been running, not just with policymakers, but even beyond, looking at citizenry in general and getting more people to back this very fundamental issue that we are battling.
Yeah, similarly, a lot of it is around coalition building with other like-minded organizations that might not be in the gun violence prevention space, but are focused on youth safety or suicide prevention or basic human rights, you know, the right to life in general for all of our people. That's one thing, but when it comes to policymakers, this is where we focus on incremental change. I can't get to the end goal without taking the steps along the way. So some of the changes that we've enacted, some people might say, oh, that's not small, it doesn't go far enough, but it's built trust and relationships with different policymakers so that when we are starting to get to the bigger things, they know that they can rely on us to do something sensible. We know that we're the only gun violence prevention group that many Republicans will have at the table because we're going to help them and help them still keep their jobs, but to do something right. And we've had great success in doing that, but there's still quite a long way to go.
Yeah, yeah. We are at time, so I do want to end on one more question. The issues that you both are tackling and discussing today carry a lot of personal weight for you. How do you navigate that space, and what's one piece of advice that you would offer to somebody doing the same? Nicole?
I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss my son. And the people I work with are so amazing at Sandy Hook Promise because, you know, they choose to be there. I choose to stand in this space as well and continually re-traumatize myself, but the people that I work with are amazing, and a lot of the things that we talk about are giving each other space and grace when we need it. I'm not great at self-care. I can preach more than I practice, that's for sure, but I think recognizing that this is something that's ever present and being okay to live in that space with those that are around you, that's critical to the work that we do every day.
Piyush, you want to take us home?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think just very much like Nicole, it is a necessity for us to confront trauma every day, and for our teams. And while I think it brings a lot of weight onto us, I think it also provides a lot of impetus and motivation for us. It tells us why we need to keep going on, and I think that. Talking to the victims and going back to the ground is absolutely necessary to keep, plowing through these issues, and I think that's what we do every day. With so I think emotional, and weight is I feel in fact necessary to carry on work like this.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. Thank you. Round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank y'all so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We do have another session right after this, so we encourage you to connect with our storytellers outside in the rotunda, or connect with us on the app. Story Studio is happening throughout today, and we'd love to see you back. We also will be back tomorrow, 11:30 to 2:30, to hear from other amazing, incredible change makers. Thank you guys again for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for joining this session. Please make your way out of the room and refer to the app for other programming options.